Hello everyone, my name is Michael, aka Blender Junkie, and I'm coming to you from London, Ontario, Canada. And I'd like to welcome you to my first tutorial. As this is my first, let me begin by telling you a bit about myself and my Blender journey, so to speak. I started off as an artist, drawing with pencil and chalk. I even have a website where I sell and display my artwork. But it wasn't quite enough for me. So I started to become interested in CG art after a friend of mine showed me his DeviantArt webpage, and I wanted to learn how to do what he did. Originally, I was interested in creating images for a novel I'm still writing, so I asked him to direct me to programs that would help me accomplish that. At first, I tried SketchUp. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It's a cool program, not very versatile. Then I tried Bryce, great program, low memory. I didn't have enough memory for what I wanted to do with it because my computer kept crashing, but I also had a crappy computer. And the program was a bit confusing too. I just didn't, both programs were a little too difficult for me to understand at that point. I'd never really done any CG stuff before, so I wasn't really at that point ready to delve that deeply into the CG world, let's say. Then something happened. I found Blender. I was skeptical at first. Even after I downloaded it, I opened it up and looked at the little cube in the viewport and closed it again. I shut it down because I was like, I don't want to. Who cares? Anyway, like I said, even after I downloaded it, I didn't really have that much of a desire to learn how to use it. I really wanted to find a program that was going to be essentially plug and play. Like I turned it on and then I told it what to do and it made it. That's essentially what I wanted. That's not what Blender is. Blender, let's admit, the interface is not very user-friendly and the program is not very intuitive. I used to think that was a bad thing. I don't anymore. I actually think Blender is a fantastic program. It does have its shortcomings, but I do believe that Blender is, for me at least, the best program for me and what I want to use the program for. I've been using Blender for about 2 years now. I've watched videos, read tutorials, and I continue to learn as much as I possibly can, as quickly as I can. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes my brain doesn't want to absorb something, so I keep watching videos and reading tutorials, and sometimes it doesn't happen. Anyway, enough of me rambling. The hardest part of this process for me, as far as coming up with a tutorial, is trying to determine what a good topic would be. That would be useful for everyone else, for all the other users, for other users out there, and one that would explain some of my personal techniques. I'm not a professional, so just bear that in mind when you're viewing the tutorial. I'm sure there are a million ways to do the same stuff that I do, and probably easier ways to do it. And again, I'm still learning, so this is a process as much for me as it is for everybody else, right? At any rate, the first thing that I made it a point to understand with regards to Blender was its most base function, which is what I wanted to use it for originally, which was modeling. I don't model for games, or even animations, really. I create, though I've created a couple of animations, they're really short and nothing major, but I model really for still images, for detail-oriented shots, like close-ups, things like that. That's what my wheelhouse is. So this tutorial is going to focus on that base function of Blender and on the skills that I have developed as I've learned in order to accomplish what it is I want to accomplish. So we're going to talk about modeling. And modeling essentially is the distorting and reconfiguration of base meshes, in this case, reconfiguring a base mesh into greebles. Alright, so you're probably asking yourself, what is a greeble? Well, simply put, greebles are details that are added to the surface of a larger object to make it appear more complex, more visually interesting, and to give it the impression of size. A great example of that would be the Star Destroyer, which I'm currently working on actually as a model. It's a great example of that, an 8-foot, 9-foot model in the middle of a studio looks 1,600 feet, which I think is what it's supposed to be. Anyway, it gives the impression of size. So this is a Greeble pattern that I created actually that I'm going to be using to texture my Star Destroyer. But let me show you some different examples. This is another, basically what Greebles are, those really fine details. All right. I got these images off the web. I'm not using them for anything except for examples. But yeah, so anyway, those are Greebles. All right. So we're going to talk about how to create Greebles using a couple of different tools that I've used and that I continue to use that I really like. We're going to start off, of course, with the loop cutting tool. Okay, so loop cuts. First thing we have to do is we have to add in a basic shape. Okay, so we're going to start with the most basic shape we possibly can, a plane. Doink. Smack dab in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to hit Z, and Z takes me into wireframe mode, so I can actually see through it. You don't have, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to do that. This is what I prefer doing. Anyway, I'm going to scale up my my plane. Okay, I'll scale it along the X. There we go. So now that's the start of what I'm going to do. So I wouldn't normally do this, by the way. I wouldn't actually create all these Greebles, but I'm just going to show you a couple of different examples using this as my template. Okay, so if I was using a loop cut tool, basically is great if you're doing straight lines. If all the Greebles that you're creating are straight, they don't have any angles like these, then it's good, it's perfect. So I'm just going to show you how to do the loop cuts just up here in the corner here. I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and you can see it's one big shape, right? Now to do a loop cut, you're going to do Control R on your keyboard, okay? And purple line appears, as you can see. All right. Now it doesn't move; it places it smack dab in the middle of your mesh, okay? If I left click once, it creates it. Now I can still move it because I haven't left clicked a second time to position it, okay? So I'm going to position this over here, over top of that line, and then I'm going to left click one more time and it positions it where I want it, okay? Now I want you to bear in mind, I want you to look at this count and look at this count here, okay? This count's not going to change quite as much, but this one will. So I've essentially created two faces from one surface, all right? Now, if I add another loop cut, another loop cut, pressing Control R, can't speak today. Click again. Oops. Let's undo that. Let's do that again. Control R. I'm going to position this one here. Okay. I'm going to click again, and it positions it. Okay. Now I've created four faces. All right. I'm going to do that again to create the small one in the middle here. And one more time. Control R. There. Okay. So now, this is the Greeble I'm creating. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this little part for a second. Okay. So let's go back into, let's press Z again, go back into our solid mode, still in edit mode. And now we're going to go down here, see where you have an option to either choose vertices, edges, or faces. I'm going to select faces, and I'm going to select those four. Now to select, you simply hold the Shift key, and then right mouse click over top of the faces you want to select. Okay. Now if I press E on my keyboard for extrude, okay, I'm going to do 0.1, okay, on my number pad. So I've extruded that. So that's a Greeble. That's one little Greeble. Okay. Then I can do extrude 0.1 again. So E on my keyboard and then 0.1 on the number pad. Okay. So I've created two little pieces of a Greeble. Okay. If I go back to my top view, there we go. Okay. So I've created that. Now, here's the problem. I'm going to go back into edit mode. I have all these extra faces that I don't really need because they don't line up with the other Greebles that I'm going to create. And if I wanted to actually now create all these Greebles the way they are, if I do another loop cut, I have to do this, and then I have to do another loop cut here, right? And then I'll have to create another loop cut, you know, here, and then here. And what I've done is I've created I now have 40 faces. That's a lot of faces, okay? I don't want to do that, okay? So what I'm going to do is show you something a little different, okay? I'm going to undo all this. Control Z, by the way, undoes everything. Okay, so anyway, that's a loop cut. All right, loop cuts are, like I said, they're great if you're creating parallel lines or straight lines. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the knife tool. Okay, so the knife cutting tool basically works like this. Okay, I'm going to make sure I'm in edge select mode. I just find it a lot easier to work with. I'm still in edit mode, as you can see. That's my solid. That's edit. Okay, Now, in edit mode, to get to the knife cutting tool, you're going to hit K on your keyboard. All right. Now, you'll notice that when I actually, a little green dot appears. I don't know if you can see it in the tutorial, but there's a little knife icon that looks like a modeling knife, essentially, that appears with a little green dot. So I'm just going to set my little green dot against one of the edges. You'll notice that the edge turns green. Okay. If I left-click once, it essentially starts my first cut. Okay, it's like when I'm putting my knife on the paper if I'm going to cut the paper. Okay, I'm going to go down to where I want it to sit to create the first cut. Okay, and now if I were just to hit enter, it would do nothing. Okay, and in fact, if I were to go into vertices select, which is down here, or vertex select, you'll notice that it created another vertices along the edge of that edge, and I don't want it there. So we're just going to undo that. Okay, so now we're back in edge select mode. I'll lower that down, don't need it. I'm going to hit K again on my keyboard. Incidentally, if you notice that I undo stuff, if you do Control Z on your keyboard and just hit Control Z, it'll undo your last action, and you can just keep undoing until you're back where you want to be. Anyway, so there's my first cut using K on my keyboard. Okay, and now cut number 2. And I'm actually going to make this one not straight on purpose to show you another option that you have here if you discover that you're doing that. Okay, I'll hit enter, and now it's created this second face. Now, the reason I did that is because it's important to remember that when using the knife cutting tool, you can't lock it to a particular axis. So it's really a feel. You have to feel your way through it. Okay, but I'm going to scale this along the Y, and I'm going to hit, and to do that, I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. Y, and you can see the green line appears for the Y-axis, and then I'm going to press 0 on my key on my number pad, and it zeroes it out. Okay, I'm going to grab it and move it along the Y just so it's a little bit more in the right spot. Okay, so now I'm going to actually do a couple others here really quickly, just so you can kind of see the benefit of the knife cutting tool. Okay, because I want to get one of these angular lines in here so you can kind of see how effective this is. And I'll do that and enter. Okay, so now that's what I've essentially created. I've created those 3 shapes. Alright, now if I were just to, I'm going to go into face select mode here, and again that's the option you have down here. You can do vertex select, edge select, or face select. I'm going to select this face. Okay, and if I were just to select them and extrude them, it would extrude them as one solid shape. Okay, so if I just extrude one solid shape, doesn't look that interesting, to be perfectly honest with you. I want it to be more interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face, and then I'm going to hit I on my keyboard. Okay, I creates what's called an inlet face. Okay, and it creates 4 extra faces around it, but this is essentially an inlet face. Okay, if I were to left click, it would automatically create it. Okay. And I guess the default is alright. It's a little too big for me, but I'll just use it as an example. Normally I would do this a little smaller. I'll do the same thing with this one, hitting I on my keyboard, left clicking to verify the selection. I on my keyboard, verifying the selection. It's actually a lot easier to do an inlet face than it is to do extrude and scale, because sometimes the scale doesn't work on angled shapes. Okay, it distorts it, and sometimes even the inlet face does the same thing. Okay, so anyway, now if I extrude 0.050 is what I'm going to do. Now I've essentially created 3 different shapes. And if I render that out, you can kind of see what I mean, right? So if I render that out, oops, that's a little bright still. 1. Okay, so can't really see it because it's just the nature of creating greebles like this. But what if I darken this a bit? Let me add a new, and then just darken below. Okay, there we go. That's a bit better. So you can see the greebles now actually appearing, and that's essentially it. That's essentially the tools that I use to create greebles and to create details. Now this is for creating extrusion greebles, greebles that you can extrude from the surface of something. Other greebles like pipes and unique greebles like the ones found on the Star Destroyer, those you actually have to model. I actually have a couple of other just really quick videos of me modeling those to give you an example of that. All right, but essentially that's it. That's all. Those are the tools that I use to create greebles, and that's basically how I do my Greeble modeling. All right. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing what you think, and I also look forward to doing my next tutorial. So thanks again, and happy blending.